Well, Rick, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to folks out there about the legislative process in this last legislative session. You notice that the title is "What Happened for Solar or Not?" with an exclamation mark after it. During the 2011 Texas legislative session, a lot of folks have been dwelling on the "or not" portion of it. But in spite of that, there were several things that did occur in a positive vein. That are incrementally helpful, we hope, in advancing the effort for solar development in the state. I think first I would like to just give a real quick understanding of the Texas legislature, or the legislative process, and how TREIA addresses it. For those of you that are not familiar with it, the Texas legislature meets only every other year, 140 days in its regular session. So it's a very short period of time to get an awful lot potentially done. In the interim period of time, the association addresses the needs and interests of the different sectors that we represent, which is solar, wind, biomass, geothermal, and hydrokinetic, through a policy committee process where each of the sectors determines through a series of meetings and discussions what the most critical things might be that they would like to see addressed in the upcoming legislative session. These recommendations are then placed before the Board of Directors, which ultimately develops and finalizes a legislative agenda or legislative objectives document. This is accomplished in advance of the session in a timely enough fashion to allow circulation of these objectives through the legislature. And we've been doing this for quite a few years, so we have a history over there. Folks look to this legislative objectives list for some guidance and hopefully pick up on some of the objectives and turn them into legislation. Historically, we used to be more involved in actually writing the individual bills because we couldn't find anyone at the session hardly who was willing or interested in addressing it or writing it themselves. But in the last 2 or 3 sessions, we have found that the increased interest in renewable energy is sort of a double-edged sword. It's resulted in so many legislators being interested in the issue that our policy objectives get picked up by not just 1 or 2, but in some cases 3, 4, 5, or a half dozen legislators who wish to choose one of those and write a bill about it. This can become somewhat problematic, and it increases the challenge at the session when we start trying to zero in on language which we may have suggested or that we favor. But I guess that's a good problem to have in many ways. So that's the TREIA process and the objectives list. I will now move to that first slide, which lays out for you what we've done in this last session as far as bills go. There were 13 legislative objectives in our document, which we shared. And we encouraged the filing of bills for all of those. We were successful in getting bills filed for 8 out of 12 objectives. The 13th objective did not really require a bill to be filed. It was a defensive objective, which was to maintain existing tax exemptions, which, as you see on the last bullet, we did accomplish. In addition to the bills that I'm sorry about that, I'm in my office. In addition to the bills that were filed that did represent our objectives, there were many others that were filed that we share the objectives with, but not necessarily did we have them on our list. So we got behind some of those bills as well. Out of all of those bills, 6 of the 8 objectives that were picked up by legislation passed. And as I said, the 13th objective did not require legislation. So as we reviewed what were several thousand bills filed in the session, 113 of those bills were determined to be of interest enough to us to add them to our action. And of those, we ended up making a formal decision to support 60 of them. 15 of those passed. Of those 60, several of them were either exact duplicates or very similar to one another, along the veins of what I mentioned earlier in our discussion. We also selected to oppose 9 of those bills, and fortunately, all 9 of those were defeated. All the rest of the bills out of that list of 113 we tracked throughout the session just to make sure that something didn't pop up that was problematic, and if something changed that we wanted to support, we could get behind it. Now, on to the issue of what didn't happen. We might as well touch on those bills initially. I don't want to spend a lot of time on them, and we can come back to that in the Q&A, hopefully. But the 3 major ones that most people were interested in were House Bill 2961 by Representative Darby, which was the statewide solar incentive bill, which did address an incentive for residential, commercial, and utility scale projects. It was a follow-on to a bill which had been filed in the previous session of the legislature, and very similar. We did get a hearing on it, but didn't move out of committee, and we weren't successful in moving that bill forward. House Bill 774 by Representative Banchia, and simultaneously filed on the Senate side as 330 by Watson, was our RPS 1,500 megawatt goal for non-wind renewable resources by 2020. Similarly, we did get a hearing. It was a good hearing, but unfortunately, we were not able to move that one out of committee either. House Bill 3259 by Representative Strama was a bill that was put in there to firm up 500 megawatt non-wind target that exists in the current renewable portfolio standard in rural at the PUC, and make sure that it was clear that it should be mandatory. It has been historically interpreted because of the difference in the terminology as being a good thing to try to accomplish, but not mandatory. That bill also was not passed. On to the bills that did pass, I will just focus on the 4 most important, I think, bills out of those and give some significant detail on each of them. And then to the extent we have time available, I'll touch on other things in the rest of the presentation. House Bill 362, which was the Solar and Homeowners Association bill, provides a criteria for the installation of solar energy devices that, if met, restricts the right of property owners associations or homeowners associations to interfere with the installation of private home solar systems. The legislation allows HOAs to require that property owners receive HOA approval before installation of a solar energy device, but approval must be granted if all the requirements listed in the law are satisfied, and it must be given within a reasonable amount of time after application. In other words, they can't dilly-dally and postpone a response. HOAs generally may not withhold approval for the installation of a solar energy device on a roof or in a yard or a patio as long as the installation is installed no higher than the roof line. It conforms to the slope of the roof and has a top edge that runs parallel to the roof line, has solar panel frames that are silver, bronze, or black color tones, commonly available colors in the marketplace, and is no taller than the fence line if it's installed in a yard or patio. The Homeowners Association Approval Committee does have the right to block a solar installation if the committee determines in writing that placement of the device, as proposed by the property owner, constitutes a, quote, condition that substantially interferes with the use and enjoyment of land by causing unreasonable discomfort or annoyance to persons of ordinary sensibilities, end quote. However, the HOA committee cannot prohibit the solar installation on these grounds if the property owner receives written approval from all adjoining property owners. HOAs can also prohibit installation of solar energy devices that are installed on a property owned or maintained by the agency, on commonly owned properties anywhere other than the property owner's roof, fenced yard, or fenced patio, or in violation of manufacturer's installation or warranty requirements, or in a way that violates the law or threatens public safety and health. And then finally, and this is a critical one, HOAs can also prohibit development of solar during a subdivision's, quote, development period, end quote. The next bill is Senate Bill 981, also known as the Distributed Renewable Generation Third-Party Ownership Bill. This one paves the way for third-party ownership models for distributed renewable generation, or DRG, that emerge within the Texas electric market. It does so by broadening the definition of a DRG owner in Texas electric markets to include the actual owner of the DRG system, if it's different from the retail customer, the retail electric customer behind whose utility revenue meter the DRG is installed, and any third party who is assigned ownership rights to the energy produced from the DRG system. It clarifies that neither the retail electric customer nor the owner of the DRG is an electric utility, retail electric provider, or power generation company, and is not subject to the regulation or registration requirements applicable to these entities at the Public Utility Commission of Texas. The bill applies to the competitive areas inside of ERCOT and the still regulated areas outside of ERCOT. This was a point of some contention, but that's the way the final bill did end up. We were concerned that it would be restricted only to inside of ERCOT. It applies to small DRG systems that are, at the time of installation, have an annual electricity production estimate that is equal to or less than the annual electricity consumption of the retail customer. It does not address third-party ownership rules affecting municipal utilities or rural electric cooperatives. The third bill is Senate Bill 1910, Net Metering and Efficiency Programs for El Paso Electric. It enables El Paso Electric, which is the investor-owned utility that serves that still regulated area outside of ERCOT, to offer its customers net metering for distributed renewable generation via a single that runs forward and backwards. If the DRG is a qualifying facility, or QF, with a rated capacity of 40 kilowatts or less, or the DRG is rated to produce an amount of electricity annually that is less than the amount of electricity the owner consumed in the year before installation, or nest thereof. For apartments with master metering that are occupied by low-income elderly tenants, Senate Bill 1910 enables El Paso Electric to offer the same net metering option if the DRG is reasonably expected to generate not less than 50% of the apartment house's annual electric use. DRG production in excess of consumption over a billing cycle is to be credited at the utility's avoided cost. A credit balance of not more than $50 on the owner's monthly bill may be forwarded onto the owner's next monthly bill, and the utility will refund to the owner a credit balance that is not carried forward, or the portion of a credit balance that exceeds $50 if the credit balance is carried forward. And the final one of the four is House Bill 2777, which is the State Efficiency and Renewable Energy Finance Program for nonprofits and houses of worship. It establishes a pilot program that provides loans to community-based organizations and houses of worship to finance the implementation of energy efficiency measures and renewable energy technology in the buildings owned and operated by those organizations. This finance program will be an expansion of the state's longstanding, very successful Lone Star revolving loan program, which is administered by the State Energy Conservation Office, SECO, and was previously only available to state entities. The next grouping of bills are ones that are peripheral, but they could have an impact, and they could have a favorable and significant impact depending on how any rules related are written and what happens in the economy as it's applied. House Bill 51 is an Efficiency and High Performance Standards for State Buildings bill. And I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail on this. I'm just going to say that for many years we have worked on refining an existing law which we passed back in the mid-1980s that requires solar in state structures. We have never been fully able to get the language in such a fashion that it actually forces solar installations in state buildings. It has encouraged them, and ultimately we've seen a few go in now, but it's primarily because of the driving efforts of SECO itself and the availability of grant funds that flow through that office to these state agencies. The next bill is House Bill 1728, public flexibility for performance contracting. This one could have some positive impacts. This bill provides the governing board of the state institutions or higher education, the board of trustees of school districts or state agency with more options and greater flexibility in utilizing the energy savings performance contracting program. Under the new law, these public entities are now allowed to use any available money other than money borrowed from the state to pay for such services under this section, and provides that the board is not required to pay for such costs solely out of the savings realized by the institution of higher education under an energy savings performance contract. That's a significant change in how business has been done up to this point. The next one is Senate Bill 898, Public Institutions Energy Use Reduction Goals Set. Again, I won't spend much time on this one. It simply tightens, in many people's opinions anyway, or ratchets up the requirements for energy efficiency, but there's some controversy about the nature of the language that it may ultimately be gamed in such a way that it does not accomplish what it was intended to. I'm no specialist in the energy efficiency rules, but to the extent that they are effective and they force things further up the chain, where institutions have to start using things like renewables to offset more power use than they might just with straightforward efficiency measures, that's a positive thing. And we were very successful some years back in making sure that solar photovoltaics and solar hot water and geothermal heat pumps are in the rules and laws as energy efficiency measures. So they are options and there are opportunities. And I think we may have skipped a slide here somehow. I want to address a couple of other bills that are important, and I don't think it's up on the screen. So let me go back and just see if I can catch it. No, it does appear to be. Okay, here it is. It's been combined with another slide, so I apologize for that. Senate Bill 943 is on the list. This one is a significant bill because of the attention that's being paid to and the importance of energy storage today. This one clarifies that energy storage resources that participate in the competitive wholesale market are characterized as generation assets for the purpose of interconnecting to the grid, obtaining transmission service, and selling energy and sell market. This bill is a good first step toward enacting policies to facilitate the integration of storage into the market and should provide clarity and guidance to the Public Utility Commission and to the market. And Senate Bill 312, Natural Gas and Renewables. This bill clarifies the utility code by providing that electric cooperatives or a subsidiary that sells electricity at wholesale is not a gas utility, subject to regulation as a gas utility, solely because it provides gas storage services for hire. The gas storage facility must be predominantly operated to support the integration of renewable resources and may not have a working gas capacity of greater than 5 billion cubic feet. The next grouping of bills are harmful bills, as we define them, that were defeated. And I want to touch on a few of these. Senate Bill 1590, House Bill 2652, and House Bill 3015, all related to alterations to Chapter 313 of the Texas Tax Code. And had they passed in virtually any form that they existed, and each one of them was somewhat different, they would have had some significant negative impacts on the development of renewables in the state. This Chapter 313 is an area that addresses the issue of limitation on appraised value for properties, and this was used very effectively throughout the wind industry, particularly over the last several years, as a development tool. The school districts were able to come out ahead of the game, so to speak. They're using this mechanism, and we really would have hated to see anything negative happen to it. The next one is Senate Bill, that's not a Senate bill, I'm sorry. Let me just move on to the next grouping. Without defining specific bill numbers, some of the other things that were attempted in this session that we found to be negative was an actual attempt near the end to eliminate the existing renewable portfolio standard, to remove it from law. That didn't get much in the way of support. It didn't have legs, but it still was concerning. Another one is stopping competitive renewable energy zones transmission construction. There was some agitation about the 5.5 plus or minus billion dollars that the state is investing, or the ratepayers are investing, in expanding the transmission system into regions of West Texas and up into the Panhandle. And that also did not gain a lot of traction. And then there was an attempt to open up the definition of renewable energy to include non-renewable resources. It's not the first time that that's occurred. In fact, I can hardly remember a legislative session in the last 5 or 6 where there wasn't an attempt to try to do that. Peripheral technologies that some people would like to argue are renewable, which are really more sustainable, if you will, or quote clean, that actually are not renewable, wanted to take advantage of the portfolio standard and get the renewable energy credits. And once again, as we've done in each legislative session, we were able to beat that one back. I think that covers the main points that I wanted to address. Let me just add on that in the interim, there are a couple of things that will occur between now and the next legislative session as a result of bills that did pass that we have to pay close attention to. One of them being a continued discussion of Chapter 313, which has been kicked to a select committee on economic development, and a bill which also did not pass, which would have established a state energy plan, or the development of a state energy plan. While it didn't pass, it is still a subject of great interest to a lot of people, and that issue will be taken up in some form or fashion between now and the next session, and we would expect to see probably a bill filed again to try to attempt to do that. So that's my formalized presentation, and Rick, if you join back in.
Yes, you can just go to the next slide so people can see your contact information at the end. And thank you very much. We have a few questions that have come in. If you have a question for Russell, please enter it in the chat window. Russell, the first one was, is this information and more details about the bills available in a white paper, and can I download these slides afterwards?
Yes, here's the best way to access it. On the TREIA website, which you see listed on the page, treia.org, go to the left side nav bar and click on Archives, and then the choices that come up, select Newsletter. And once that next page comes up, look for the June issue of the Renewable Energy Record, which is the special legislative issue. And you will find links and so forth there, which will repeat a lot of the descriptive language for the bills that I've already talked about, plus some others, and give you a good picture of of what happened. And as you go down through those descriptions, you can click on and link directly to the bill language. So all of that is available there for you on the public accessible part of the website.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question was related to the House HR 2961 from Darby that failed. The question was, what were the structure of the state solar incentives in the proposal, and what were those based on?
I would recommend going to that actual bill. It's rather extensive and complex, and trying to go through all of those details here is probably not the best use of the time. But if you do run into any confusion about it, or it's not clear, or you can't access it in some way, feel free to contact me directly, and we can talk about it.
Okay. And the next question was related to the anti-renewable bills. What Libyan constituencies were behind these bills, specifically the end of the RPS and the anti-CREZ transmission bill?
That's a good question. It's often hard to know or tell exactly who's behind certain things. The only one of those that I mentioned that we were very clear on about who was behind it is the municipal solid waste folks. There's always been an interest on their part to take advantage of renewable energy credits and be declared renewable in using municipal solid waste in the aggregate. And that's where we draw the line, because that means that if you dumped everything and gasified it, you're including plastics and rubber and who knows what else, that doesn't count. And the argument is often made that, well, you get credit for landfill gas, why shouldn't this count? Well, the simple answer to that is that landfills are self-separating. The biomaterial producing methane is what you use. And so that's the explanation there. There were others who had similar desires who wanted to take advantage of it because they are natural gas. And the argument there is that, natural gas is methane, and methane counts when you're doing it with landfills, and methane counts if you're doing it with cows. Methane is methane. We should be considered renewable too. Well, obviously, to anybody who's versed at all on the difference between finite and infinite, and renewable and non-renewable, this is an argument that just doesn't even have a prayer. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who look at the definition or definitions as political things rather than anything to do with science or technology. And so we had to beat back that concept. As far as the CREZ lines, I don't know. My general feeling is that everybody knows that there was an atmosphere this session that was driven by a further to the right mentality or conservative mentality on all fronts, primarily focused on the economy and things that affect the economy, and the argument that anything that increases or potentially increases the cost of electricity is a negative in this environment. And there are those who have opposed CREZ lines like they oppose anything that increases cost. So nailing it down to any specific group or anything like that, pretty hard to do, but there are plenty of legislators who toe that particular line who have a reason to be concerned about it, I guess. But again, as I said, it didn't have a lot of traction, and a lot of folks in the legislature see the advantage and the opportunity that the CREZ lines are going to bring, and so it didn't make it very far.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting insight, especially the natural gas methane discussion. It seems kind of amazing to people outside of Austin.
Well, you see, natural gas is identified as green, or clean in a lot of people's universe these days, and so to them that equates to the same thing as renewable.
Incredible. All right. the next question was, how will DRG and the third-party ownership bills help the renewable industry? I think that was the Senate Bill 981.
Well, in short, what it does is it opens up potentially a little bit more of a market sector that was somewhat stymied because of the lack of clarity about whether or not a installation on a building that wasn't owned by the owner of the building was a utility, and so it would have been held back by the confusion, and it might have had to go through the utility registration process, and could it sell power to the owner of the building or not, and if it did, was it a utility? All of that got clarified as a result of this. So certain leasing types of market approaches and other innovative ways to put solar on roofs should have a little bit easier time of being implemented in the market.
Okay, and were there any bills that addressed concentrated solar power directly?
Well, the portfolio, the non-wind portfolio standard bill was the one that would have affected it most directly. And no, as far as the specific technology, the approach that we've had at the legislature that's been successful in the past is not to zero in on a specific technology within a sector, but to try to craft bills which can lift all of the boats in a sector. And there's a strong support for the idea of competition and competitiveness and driving the costs and price down. And that's something we've learned over time. You've got to craft approaches to things that have a chance, and in such a way that they're potentially workable, and you might have a shot at getting a bill through.
Great, and something has spurred a lot of people to ask questions, but we'll just have time for one more, and I'll post the rest of these questions later. The last one was, there any conversation about other states' position in the solar market and the current lagging status of Texas?
Well, there's a lot of conversation, and it comes from all different directions. The reality of it, as far as I'm concerned, is that we understand and believe that Texas, being the second most populous state, having the most available solar for development, and being in comparatively favorable economic circumstances, even though it's not the best by any means, will ultimately be a major and significant solar market. So it's not a question of if we will, it's a question of at what pace. And frankly, in the economic climate that we're in everywhere, unless you're in a state that is willing to step up and mandate things to a degree that probably is not the case, or at least hasn't been in near term in Texas, it's going to be who can come in with the most competitive approach to things and get a piece of it. The market is being driven primarily by municipal utilities at this point in time, and we have two of the most active and aggressive in the country, San Antonio and Austin. And a significant amount of solar is resulting from both of those. And then there are some smaller municipal utilities that are starting to pick up on the concepts that those two utilities have implemented. And you're going to start seeing some of the smaller municipals become players as well. To a very limited degree, there's a couple of electric co-ops that are beginning to get with the program, so to speak. But without going into a lot of detail, there are also opportunities that will evolve over the next 2, 3, 4, or 5 years, no matter what happens with additional legislation, that could help create a better and maybe much better market for distributed renewable generation in the state, based on what was called a net metering law from a couple of sessions ago, but was actually a interconnection and compensation law for distributed renewables, structures of which have not been fully implemented yet in the competitive market inside of ERCOT. I have hopes that that the structure, which includes at ERCOT a template for demand that's structured in such a way that it takes into account the presence of solar on the grid during peak and allows a better margin in there for the retail electric providers to play with and a competitive structure between them if they choose to buy back electricity from renewable installations. I have hopes that that will fall in place and evolve and work in the competitive market. As the electronic meters are installed, as they're being required throughout the state, and time of day rates and time of day registering on the meters and so forth is taken into account. And in addition to that, we are in a period of time right now where temperatures, as everybody knows down here, have been exceptional. And ERCOT is struggling to not have rolling blackouts and so forth. Discussions are going on at the PUC as we speak about having sufficient generation to address the growth that's happening in the state, given the requirements that are coming down from the EPA on coal plants and so forth. The stress is beginning to be very, very significant. And I don't think even those who have not been big supporters of solar in leadership positions will be able to ignore the fact solar provides power at the time we need it the most. And that's going to have an effect, I think, regardless of what happens at the legislature, or maybe because of what happens next session, hopefully, just as a result of the realities in the electric system in the state. I think that will bode well in the fairly near term for renewables.
Okay, thank you. There was one follow-up question about the co-ops that you mentioned. Besides the San Antonio and Austin municipal utilities, who are the most aggressive co-ops in the renewable area?
Well, I know of a group of co-ops called Golden Spread, which is up in the Panhandle, that seems to have been very interested in trying to do things, and there is a small one out near Brenham, Bluebonnet, which I think may be poised to do something. Also, here in Central Texas, Pedernales Electric Co-op has had a major change in its management in the last couple of years, and they have kind of nipped around the edges of possibly doing something. And there are maybe 2 or 3 other smaller ones around. There's over 70, 75 co-ops, and I can't tell you all of them that are looking at it, but I just have to believe, given everything that I've seen in the last couple, 3 years, that some of them will begin to maybe try their hand.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We've run 10 minutes over because we had so many questions. So I'll go ahead and close it for now. There were a couple of extra questions. I'll try to get those answered via email to the people that asked those. Thank you, Russell, for your time and this information. Also wanted to thank our sponsors, Principal Solar and the Texas Renewable Energy Industries Association. And we will get this information and these links that were mentioned up onto our website within 24 hours.
Rick, may I say one last thing?
Oh, yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, please take the time to go to TREIA.org, and while you're there, check out the upcoming Texas Renewables 2011 conference, which this year is in Corpus Christi. It will be a great venue and a great opportunity, and the details are all there. And consider, if you're not a member, joining TREIA. Thanks.